Welcome, everyone, to Couch Potato Diary. Happy Tuesday. My name is Peter Klein. Thank you all very much for tuning in today. It is going to be another busy one, and I kind of got a heart out today, so we're going to run through a few things. But coming up, the New York Jets have fired their coach, plus Fantasy Football Waiver Wire advice. We have the Fantasy Football Dumpster Darlings of the week as well. WWE Monday Night Raw recap, and we will continue the NBA preview and wrap up of the Calgary Flames previews here today. So a lot to cover. We got a poll right now talking about the New York Jets coaching situation and who could be next. So let's start with that. All right. So the big news of the day is that Robert Saleh has been fired by the New York Jets following a 2-3 start with the exclamation mark, the cherry on top, a loss against the Minnesota Vikings in England Sunday morning. And honestly, I was a little surprised and not totally sure how to feel about it, because we were on here yesterday with Walt Grizzly chatting about how I didn't think Saleh was that good. I didn't think that he was making a difference. I thought that he had a pretty good roster and was making it a pretty good football team at its peak. So I don't think that there is a whole lot there going on. Also, I have said yesterday that there was that there has been a bit of a copy and paste formula. And so whenever a coach that is outside of that formula doesn't work, it bums me out. And so that is where I kind of come down on this one. And when you look at both sides, I don't think he proved he was a good coach. That is basically what this all comes down to. He had a good defense, and he kept it a good defense. He's 12th in DVOA, but I don't think that he did anything to elevate the talent on the defensive side of the football. Like, with this roster, 12th in DVOA doesn't seem like a mastermind on the defensive side that you just simply cannot let go. And then you see the undisciplined penalties that are happening, and you're blaming it on the cadence, and it's all of these things, and it's just nothing's improving. Nothing is getting better. And that is where I think a lot of the blame for him lies. And I think that is where a lot of, if he were to look back with any form of regret or anything of that nature, I think a lot of it would be based on a lack of improvement, a lack of growth. And when you are a coach that is brought in based on being hard-nosed in the vibes, you kind of have to do really well. And you have to get the little things right. And if you're going to be that hard-nosed, defensive-minded coach, the little things have to be right. And they just weren't here, right? That's a fact. They have not been perfect in those areas. On the other hand, this does seem like a panic move. I don't think he's been all that good, but I also don't think at 2-3 you needed to freak out in this way. I don't think that this has been so off the rails that they had no other choice but to go out and hire a new head coach and make this move. I still don't think it's enough to fire a guy. And honestly, if you were going to fire him after a 2-3 start, why didn't you fire him after last season? Like, if I get 2-3, like, you'd rather be 3-2. And we've talked on here before. It hasn't looked all that impressive. And again, I don't see where it's not his fault. I see where there's blame to go for others, for sure. But I don't see what he has done to elevate it. And so in this last defense here, I don't want to be you guys to clip this or whatever and just be like, oh, well, this guy thinks that Robert Saleh did a good job. Because overall, I don't think he did. It's a failing grade more than a passing grade, I think, for Saleh with the Jets. But at 2-3, with still figuring some things out and trying to get everything on track and all of those things, if you were going to fire him now, why didn't you fire him in the offseason when you very plainly could have? Like, last season didn't go all that great. I know you can explain it away as, the quarterback, whatever, but you had an out. You could have fired him. You have Vrabel out there. You have Belichick out there. Why not do this now? Or why do this now? Why not do this at the beginning of the year? And so that's why, you see the picture of Belichick in a Jets hoodie. And it's like, oh, could this be happening soon? Bill Belichick is not joining something in the middle of the season. I don't think, anyway. I think that he is going to wait until he has a full grasp of a full season and has an opportunity to help control things in the offseason and help bring in his own talent and all of those things. So I think the Belichick stuff just isn't, I don't think it would make sense right now. Same thing with Vrabel, right? Like, those are not coaches that you bring in mid-season, I don't think. And I get the Jets have high expectations this year, but I think when you are bringing in a Bill Belichick or a Mike Vrabel, that is a culture changer. And you don't do that, I don't think, in the middle of the season. And I don't think Belichick would allow for his hands to be on something that he didn't have a whole lot of control of in terms of roster and all of that. I think the big thing that everyone is having some issues with is Robert Saleh seems like a fairly likable human being, right? Like he seems like a guy who I would like to have coaching my football team. Now the Raiders have one of these right now in the Vibes defensive coach thing, and it's going great. But he seems like a guy who you would want around. And so people kind of fall for that, right? And I'm not saying like get tricked for it. I'm saying in like people fall for that. Hey, Toxic, how's it going? And so you get kind of sucked into that a little bit. And also, their quarterback is really easy to dislike. And so that makes things pretty easy to just be like, you know what? No, not gonna approve of this, because it does feel like an Aaron Rodgers thing, right? Like that there was obviously some discomfort there between these two guys. And the other part of it is, I don't think Saleh is only to blame, because if you were looking at kind of divvying up the blame pie for this football team, most of it goes, I think, to the offense. They are 12th in DVOA on defense, 23rd on the offensive side of the football. And so I do think that there is a lot that needs to be looked at on that side of things, and there needs to be, I think, a big adjustment. But again, when you're dealing with Aaron Rodgers and all that comes with that, I don't think you can make that change and do a deep philosophical shift on the offensive side of the football mid-season. He just wouldn't go for it, and quite frankly, you'd be creating more problems than you'd be solving. And yes, that is a problem, but I think if the Jets wanted to solve this right now, this was kind of the move that they had to make. Again, I don't think Saleh did anything that would keep you from firing him, but I don't think he did anything that would make you fire him either. So it's a weird spot, for sure. But again, it does feel like it is the Aaron Rodgers show out there in New York, and this isn't going to change that. And now, I do think that it kind of takes away one layer of protection for Aaron Rodgers, because a bit of this, you could be like, okay, yeah, it's a coach who doesn't really know what he's doing, maybe isn't all that good to begin with, and maybe you can't really blame it on Rodgers. But now that's gone. And I get you are not bringing in Bill Belichick tomorrow. And look, maybe they bring him in tomorrow and I could be wrong. But I don't think that's the way it would go. But I do think that there is there is a lot of blame that I think goes to Rodgers. I've seen some people pointing to the roster construction. I'm still not there. I don't think you can go in 5 weeks from, hey, look, this team is only a quarterback away, guys. Look at all the talent they have. Look at it offensively, defensively. Look at all these great talented players they have. And then 5 weeks in, be like, what? It's not the coach's fault. They got no talent out there. Like that. I think we're over-exaggerating a little bit to try to put more of the blame away from Robert Saleh today than there needs to. This is a good roster. I do think it is a fairly well-constructed football team, but it was on Aaron Rodgers to elevate this group, and he simply hasn't. And maybe you can blame the Jets for entrusting a 40-year-old quarterback coming off of his leg exploding, that is going to be the guy who is going to elevate you, but this is on Aaron Rodgers now. This offense is basically in the same spot that they were last season with one of the worst quarterbacking situations in the league. And currently, he has this group at, again, 23rd in offensive DVOA, simply not good enough if they are going to make any kind of noise here in the AFC and in the NFL. And so now all the pressure is on. There is no more safety blanket for Aaron Rodgers, although there shouldn't be any more safety blanket for Aaron Rodgers, although there probably will be. But look, like Miami and New England suck. And we'll see. Like Tua sounds like he's going to be coming back. Buffalo is coming back down to earth. I still think there's a pretty good football team there, but not best in the league like it looked in the first 3 weeks of the season. There is a lot that is right there for this team to be able to go out and make the most of it. So now they have to. And I don't know if this new coach, the interim cat who they brought in, is the guy to lead the charge. This honestly feels like a move that would kind of demoralize more than it would motivate. And that is a little bit rough because now, like coming into the season, one of the big things around the Jets was they were projected to have the fourth easiest schedule in the league. Well, they kind of played the part of the schedule that was supposed to help that the most, and they came out of it 2-3, which I suppose is a bit of a knock to they're 2-3. Why would you fire him now? And also, if you do think that this guy is a bit of the problem, you kind of got to do it right now because they have two gigantic games coming up, and really three of their next four are huge and are going to dictate the season for the New York Jets. They have back-to-back primetime games coming up against Buffalo and Pittsburgh, then an easier one against the Patriots, followed by a game against Houston, who look like they are at least figuring a couple of things out. So those three of those four games are the if you want to prove to us how good you are, now is the time. There is a very real world where they're like, okay, we got this, here we go, now they're back on track. There is also a world where they lose 3 of 4, and all of a sudden they are, what would that be, 3-7, and it has just been a completely unmitigated disaster. And then after that, you have Arizona, Indy, Seattle, then you close out at Miami, at Jacksonville, home Rams, at Buffalo, and home Dolphins. It is not the toughest schedule in the world, but it is a whole lot of 50-50 for this Jets team. And so now is the time where they get to decide what type of a football team they are. I don't have a lot of confidence. I didn't have a lot of confidence coming into the season, and I still don't now. I think that it is a bit of a disaster out with the New York Jets right now. So that is the story from one of the marquee teams. That's not true. It's weird to have New York and it not be a New York team, or a marquee team, but one of the bigger market teams in the league anyway, with the New York Jets. All right, let's now shift into the fantasy football talk, where, I mean, look, if 2-3 is getting you fired, I'm getting fired in a lot of places. It's been a bit of a grind, fantasy football-wise, but we're here to try to correct it in the Fantasy Football Waiver Wire. All right. This week, there are a lot of options out on the waiver wire to help us out. That doesn't pertain to quarterback. I like to give you help all I can. This week, it's tough. The best option out there is Daniel Jones, 9% owned. I don't love it. I don't think he's very good. I have been very aggressive in my thinking that he is not good. But the Bengals defense have been giving up some big games so far, and he's kind of the best option that is out there. So maybe keep an eye on Derek Carr's injury situation. They have I seem to recall them having a pretty good matchup. I didn't write it down, nor did I apparently lock it into the old memory box here. But that is one coming off of the injury late in the game. Yeah, they got Tampa Bay. That one I think could be a matchup that he is able to exploit a little bit. So I think that there is something you can take away from that one. So if Derek Carr is healthy and available, I would do that over Daniel Jones. But like Andy Dalton and some of the other ones, a lot of teams I have seen now, a lot of quarterbacks who are available, aren't very good. And a lot of teams have kind of scooped up some backups as this season has gone on. At wide receiver, we got a bunch. 20% owned. Alec Pierce. He made some big plays in the deep passing game. He is a little boomer bust, but whether it is Flacco or whether it is Anthony Richardson, this team really likes to push the football down the field. And so you are not going to get big target games for this kid, but he has, I think, some game-breaking ability. And so if you are in a spot where you need a home run swing this week, he's a pretty good home run swing to take. Trey Tucker of the Vegas Raiders at 18% owned. He's had at least 5 targets in each of the last 3 weeks. They are trying to get him the football. He is one of their, and I always hated these types, just get him the football in space and look what he can do. It's like, yeah, that's everyone, man. That's football. So like that analysis always bugged me, and that was the justification for taking a lot of players when it really shouldn't have been. But Trey Tucker is a very quick receiver, and I think that we are going to see maybe a little bit more of an expansion of his role as it becomes very apparent that Devontae Adams isn't coming back for the Raiders, and so they're going to start to, I think, work him in as a legitimate number 2. Now, he's the obvious number 3 in the passing game behind Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers, but he provides a speed element that those two guys, not that Myers is slow, or even Bowers being slow, but those guys don't have what he has. And also, they have run it with him a couple of times out of the backfield. I could see a little bit more because they do not have, like, the Thunder and Lightning. That was the old thing. They have 3 running backs that are all Thunder. They have no Lightning. And even the Thunder is just a little bit of a Like there isn't, the running backs suck in Vegas is what I'm trying to tell you. And Trey Tucker, I don't think he becomes a featured back or anything like that, but I do think that they look to get him the football a little bit more as the seasons go on. Michael Wilson, 13% owned. I keep telling people about this kid. At least 6 targets in the last 3 weeks, double-digit points in 2 of those 3 weeks. He is the clear number 2 receiver in Arizona, an offense that we have high opinions of and I think can continue to grow. So that is a player that I think really does help out some desperate teams and a guy that you can plug in right away. At 8% owned, it's Jalen Tolbert. This one, it feels like chasing with the Dallas Cowboys when he had the big game against Pittsburgh last week, but Brandon Cooks has been placed on the IR, and 10 targets is tough to ignore. So this is one that I think if you are desperate, you can put him right away. If you have the luxury, I would still pick him up and stash him and just kind of hope that maybe you can scout it a little bit and see what they actually do with him going forward. But I do think that he's okay talent-wise, and that offense needs something desperately. On the Kansas City side, I'm going Juju Smith-Schuster, 7% owned. Got a lot of work last week. That may have been a defensive game plan to try to take away whoever or whatever, but the defensive game plan didn't really work with the Saints last game. And yes, Kansas City is on a bye, so this is a stash. And even then, probably, and if you're desperate, because we have seen this movie before, I just do think that with Rice going down with the injury and Xavier Worthy maybe not necessarily being the refined route runner that Kansas City needs at this moment, I think Juju is going to have a lot of options now in this passing game. Moving on to the running backs. At 31% owned, it is Justice Hill. He's getting 48% of the snaps, and the game against Washington, again, should be a shootout this week. And I understand I kind of projected that last week, and we didn't necessarily hit the home run with it. So that is a little bit frustrating, for sure. But I still think that this is a player that has some value, especially for those who are a little bit desperate at running back. This one's a bit more of a stash because Minnesota is on a bye this week, but Ty Chandler at 28% owned. Aaron Jones a little bit banged up and is kind of just perpetually banged up. So even if Jones is healthy, I do think we maybe see a little bit more of Ty Chandler in this offense. He's a good football player. He's not great, but I do think that he is talented enough that if he gets the reins, he could be a really big player for this team moving forward. Tank Bigsby at 24%. Plain and simple, he looks like the better running back in Jacksonville right now. He is not getting close to as many looks as ETN, but it is shrinking a little bit. And I think everyone is seeing that Bigsby right now is at least a viable option for Jacksonville. And I think that this is a number that is going to rocket up. This one's a bit more projection-y. Actually, the next two are. Tyrone Tracy at 23% owned. After we did the show the other day, it came out that Singletary wasn't going to be in the lineup. And so Tracy took over, I guess. And I thought he looked pretty good. I thought that there was some real speed for him to the outside. I thought he ran it really hard. And I mean, he is significantly younger than Singletary. And for a Giants team, that is going to look to the future, I would say, that is certainly more Tracy than it is Singletary. So I think that this is a guy who gets more and more as the season goes along. Now, it could be a Chase Brown, Zach Moss situation, and we end up getting frustrated that the more talented back isn't getting the rock every week, or as often as we would like, but I do think that he is worth at least a speculative ad in most leagues. And Jalen Wright at 8% owned. Again, Miami is on the bye, but with HN banged up last week, he and Mostert really started. It was the only thing that was working for Miami was running the ball against the New England Patriots, and they did it with some success, and Jalen Wright did, and he looked fine. And so I think as that offense goes, this is not a bad option to have in a Jalen Wright. But again, this is much more of a stash because they're on a bye, and there's a chance when they come back, a chance healthy. But if you have some depth and you have some standings wiggle room, I think that Jalen Wright is a player you can absolutely trust. At tight end, the only one that was really jumping out was Zach Ertz, 31% owned. He had 8 targets last week. only converted on a couple of them, but they're going up against the Ravens, who have been giving up points to tight ends this year. And so I think Washington, again, this one screams shootout to me. So I think you can trust him with Jaden Daniels and helping them move the ball up the field against a Baltimore secondary that has been exposed at times this year. And on defense, I am surprised how many people dropped this defense on their bye week, but the LA Chargers against the Denver Broncos, that is one that you can pick up and probably roll with for a lot of the season and feel really comfortable. It is a talented defense. It is a very, very good defense, and one that I think will help you out in fantasy. So I think there is a real value in that ad this week. So now, those are the players who you should be picking up this week. But we always like to look back, and sometimes it can be a little bit cruel. So that's where we come in to just make it feel even worse. And this week's Fantasy Dumpster Darlings might take the cake as the most random assortment of guys who put up an unbelievable week this week. Let's get into the Fantasy Football Dumpster Darlings. So each week, I like to go through and see who of the lesser-owned players had the biggest weeks in fantasy football, and what type of a team could you put together with guys who were tossed away to the scrap heap. And for week 5, it was wild. We begin at the quarterback spot. 8% owned, Joe Flacco, 26.56 fantasy points. At wide receiver, Darius Slayton, still in the league. Only 3% of fantasy owners knew that, and he put up 22.2 fantasy points. Alec Pierce, 20% owned, 20.9 fantasy points for the Indianapolis Colts in that wild game against Jacksonville. Speaking of Jacksonville, Tank Bigsby, 24% owned, 25 fantasy points. Beasting out this week. Roshan Johnson, 20% owned with the Chicago Bears, 14.5 fantasy points. At tight end, the third Baltimore tight end, the second one to outscore Mark Andrews, it's Charlie Collar or something. 0% owned, 14.1 fantasy points. How dare you? At wide receiver, 7% owned, Jalen Tolbert with 18.2 fantasy points for the Dallas Cowboys. Our defense, the New York Giants. I don't know why 2% of you owned the New York Giants, but it paid off with 18 fantasy points. And every week we do this, there is a kicker in the top 3 who is barely owned. This week, it's Chase McLaughlin, who is owned in 16% of leagues, and he put up 16 fantasy points. So this team, whose ownership percentage added up to 100. So this whole roster of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 players, basically averaging 10 point something own percent, comes up with 169.86 fantasy points. Every single week, there are guys just off on the scrap heap who are going to put up some monster numbers for you, and it becomes very frustrating. So that is the NFL talk. Let's wrap up the football with some 3-down football. Could have been I think looking at all of those, I think Alec Pierce in the Vampire League was owned. I think Bigsby in the Vampire League was owned, and that was it. So I should be nailing these a little bit more than I am with all of these every single week and all of that. The one thing I have ran into in that Vampire League, it just feels like it's a 10-team league, and so it feels so dumb cutting some of these guys when you're going out and making these pickups for the week. And I think I have to separate that. It's you know what? No, I'll let go of Ezekiel Elliott when there are other leagues where I would be just scratching and clawing to try to get Ezekiel Elliott. But this one, it has a bit more depth than that. And so if you're not going to start him in 1 week, off you go. And so I think I need to be a little bit more aggressive with that for sure. But again, came so close. I was one touchdown away from any of my guys, 1 touchdown away, and I would have got Geno. But I think we're getting closer. We're getting closer each week. But time is certainly running out on me in that league. Okay. As I was saying, we're going to wrap up the football talk, looking at some 3-down football. It's time for CFL Power Rankings for the week. power rankings in the Canadian Football League have been very difficult to put together, but now we got a new number 1. We do not have a new number 9, and it's going to be tough to usurp the Stampeders from the number 9 spot. It is Calgary as the worst team in the Canadian Football League. Eliminated from the playoffs for the first time in a very long time. There is no aspect of this game that looks like it is going well for the Stampeders right now. And it feels like beating a dead horse that, like, every week it's like, yeah, team sucks. There isn't a whole lot that we can really go with that. At 8, it is Hamilton. The clock striking midnight and all of those sorts of things on the Hamilton Tiger Cats. And now it gets, the hole that they dug for themselves early in the year gets much more difficult to dig out of as the last 3 weeks of the season pick up. At 7, it's Ottawa. It has fallen, and it has fallen very quickly for the Ottawa Red Blacks. I had said coming into the year, I think this is an improved football team, but it wasn't as improved as we saw at the early part of the season. And I kind of warned people as we were going through the season, I know that this was used as something in our NFL talk yesterday. They aren't beating anybody. Like the wins that they have are not as impressive as you think. And they have a couple impressive wins in there, but a lot of the wins that they had kind of made the record seem a little bit fraudulent, and I think that is catching up to them very, very quickly. At 6, it's the Edmonton Elks. Again, the playoff push falls short for the Edmonton Elks, but I do think that there is a little bit of optimism for the future. And I don't know why McLeod Bethel-Thompson would play another snap for this football team. Honestly, ever. But for the rest of this season, no. At 5, it's the BC Lions. As I have said before, I think that there is a very talented football team in there. They just have a tough time dragging it out every single week. But I think now that, it's another week of getting ready and getting used to everything and all of these things, they are a I can't quit you team. And odds are they're going to be playing the Saskatchewan Roughriders in the West semi-final, whether that be out in BC or over in Regina. And I do not feel comfortable with that at all. At 4, it is the Toronto Argonauts. They are another one where I just kept waiting for the defense to get better. And it was kind of like, there's probably a more recent reference than this, but back in 2004 in WWE, when Randy Orton and Mick Foley were doing their Legend Killer thing, and Mick Foley, I think it was when Randy Orton spit in his face, and Foley backs up, and he keeps backing up, and they kept being like, oh, he's going to take a running charge at Randy Orton, he's setting him into whatever, and then he just backs up and he just leaves. That's kind of what my thought is on Toronto and how my opinion on them has gone. It's like, all right, here it comes, it's going to go, it's going to get you. No, you know what? I think it's just bad. Nothing there has really clicked in the way that I thought it would this season. At 3, it's Saskatchewan. They have won 3 in a row. I think the defense is still obviously the star of the show with this team, and if the offensive line could have stayed healthy this year, I think that this would have been a really, really dangerous football team. As it is, they are kind of peaking at the right time, and the defense is good enough that they can, I think, steal a game or maybe even 2 in the postseason, which gets you to a championship, and then anything can happen. I do think that some predictable play calling and offensive line injuries and just some relative inconsistency have held this offense back. But I do think there's a lot of talented pieces on the offensive side of the football for Saskatchewan. It's just not executing still. But 3 feels very high for them. I will admit that. And there's probably some bias in this, but the way Toronto is playing right now, do you take Toronto over Saskatchewan? I don't. Same thing goes to BC, Edmonton. Saskatchewan just beat Edmonton. So I have a tough time putting Saskatchewan lower than 3. At 2, it's Montreal. And it's more what number 1 has done than what Montreal hasn't done. But since Cody Fajardo came back, and honestly, since they clinched a playoff spot, this team has not clicked in the same way. Even when they win, it still doesn't look as impressive as you would want it to. And I think the Philpott injury really is hindering this offense in more ways than we want to give credit to. And I do think that that is kind of holding them up a little bit. So we will see if they can flip the switch, because this was kind of the thing they benefited from with Toronto in the previous year, right? Where the Argos kind of were able to take their foot off the gas and kind of cruise, and then they played a meaningful game, and 8 pick sixes later, all of a sudden, the Alouettes are going to the Grey Cup, and then they're winning the thing. So can the Alouettes avoid the same pitfalls that they took advantage of last season. But at number 1, it is Winnipeg. This defense went from being underrated to very much appreciated, and now the offense, which kind of went from being overrated, is now appropriately rated because they're balling and they are lighting it up. And so this is an offensive football team that I think scares people, and it is now looking like the most complete team in the Canadian Football League. That would be the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. So I do think they are the number 1 team in the league and rightfully so, I would say. Okay, we are going to get now into the previewing portion of things today. We will begin with some basketball. We do have some Calgary Flames still to come, and then we'll put a bow on things with the world of professional wrestling. But we'll go into basketball as the season gets going here this month, and obviously expectations for each team a little bit different. But some teams have all of the pressure on them. So here are the top 5 teams that have the most pressure on them in the NBA this season. The NBA season is right around the corner, and some teams are going to be feeling the heat, so to speak, with all of that. So here are the top 5 teams that are under the most pressure in the NBA this season. Coming in at number 5, it is the New York Knicks. When you are the Knicks and you are good, there is always pressure. When you are the Knicks and you had a seemingly promising playoff run last year, there's a ton of pressure. When it was cut short from injuries and you bring some of the key pieces back, even more, and then you make the 2 biggest trades of the offseason, it's going to pile up. The reason I only have them at 5 is because I still think there is the slightest bit of a honeymoon with this group this season. Now, if this year doesn't end with, honestly, probably 2 playoff series wins, then this team rockets to number 1 next year. The pressure is going to build very, very quickly in New York, but I still think there is a bit of a honeymoon with how good this team is and kind of how out of nowhere that came. So I don't think all of that pressure is there, but there is still quite a bit on them. At 4, it's Miami. The expectations in Miami aren't as high as they are with the Knicks. But I do think that with Jimmy Butler's contract coming up, and with everyone was like, heat culture. Well, since that finals, they haven't done a whole lot. And I think there is now a little bit of pressure on this team to try to stay relevant, because if this season doesn't go well, I think that it could be a little bit, and I know Miami doesn't rebuild. They never do. And they somehow always, they get Dwayne Wade and off they go. And they get a Bam Adebayo and look at that. And they trade for a Jimmy Butler and off they go. But I do think that if this year doesn't go well, we could see just the slightest step back for the Miami Heat. At 3, it's the Phoenix Suns. I think that they have kind of escaped some of the headlines since the postseason, but now, once this season ramps up, it's going to be like, oh yeah, they did spend a whole lot of money on this team to go nowhere and to get just spanked in the first round of the playoffs. There aren't the, oh, well, they're new, it's whatever. This is now, no. You have 2 of the most talented players in the league. They played together all year. I get, Beal was there too. But this has to start working in Phoenix. They are paying way too much money to get just annihilated in the first round. Speaking of which, at 2, it's the LA Clippers. They are spending a ton of money. They are going into a new arena. Everything now, from the offseason where they signed that guy, Kawhi Leonard, for those who are listening, and they made this push knowing that the new arena was coming in 2024, 2025. Everything was building up to this moment. And so far, hasn't worked. They had one good playoff run, and otherwise it has been a whole lot of frustration. And they are still spending mucho dinero on this team, except they let one guy walk. And so now you are entering this new arena with Kawhi Leonard, who may, walk on a court at some point this year. James Harden, and basically no other backup plan. So I think from NBA circles, there isn't a whole lot of pressure on him because there's just not a whole lot of expectations. But given what this buildup was supposed to be and what this year was supposed to mean for this team in kind of branching out on their own and moving out of mom's basement as the Clippers at Staples before and now crypto dot whatever, they need this year to go well, and no one thinks it's going to. And if it doesn't, I don't know what happens. But probably nothing good with the LA Clippers. And at number 1, it is the Philadelphia 76ers. Joel Embiid has won MVPs. You have a team that has won a ton of regular season games, but the playoff success hasn't been there. They then won the offseason. Now they need to win playoff series. This isn't good. It's not good enough to beat the Raptors or to beat the whoever's in the first round of the playoffs. You need to go out and you need to actually win these series. And if they don't, I think Joel Embiid has escaped a lot of criticism because he's really good, right? But playoffs, it hasn't been good. And that, everyone's numbers take a dip in the playoffs. You are facing tougher competition. That's what it's going to be. But every year there has been an excuse. It's, Ben Simmons. It didn't give me enough support, which is, I do think, something you can poke some holes in a little bit. Someone commented that on one of the best players in the league videos that we did. And I think we're overstating that a touch because, you've had, they went out and they got James Harden. They had Jimmy Butler. They had to, their starting five when they lost to the Raptors was actually quite good. And now you've gone out and got Paul George. Even if you want to use they didn't really get him anyone. Well, now they do. Maxey looks like a superstar and you brought in Paul George. So now you have a super team here that you need to do it. So that excuse is gone. He's saying that we're going to be committed to a championship, so we're probably going to be load managing this cat a little bit more. There are no more excuses for Joel Embiid. I do not see a player or a team that is under more pressure this year to succeed than the Philadelphia 76ers. Because if this doesn't work, you guys know I'm not a big blow it up guy, and I don't even think you should out in Philadelphia, but you're kind of running out of different cards to try to pull to try to make this thing work. So the Philadelphia 76ers are the team that is facing the highest expectations in the NBA this season. As you may or may not know, I am a Toronto Raptors fan. And so now we're going to start the Raptors portion of the NBA season preview here this year. Started a Raptor-specific podcast last year. It wasn't the best time for it, but looking to do a few more of them again this year. And so we are going to start with our Raptor breakdown, looking at the players who have a chance to break out in the upcoming season. Yes, Dynamite, the Raptor podcast, will be returning for another season, hopefully with more regularity this year as I try to iron some of those things out. But breakout players for the Toronto Raptors this season. Quite frankly, this segment for other ones, I tend to plan it as breakout and fall off. No one played well enough last year to fall off this year, so we're not going to do that. This is just the breakout portion for the Raptors. At 3, I have Davion Mitchell. He is coming from a situation where he just kind of got forced out a little bit and didn't really have that playing time. I don't think that's going to be an issue with the Raptors, and I think a lot of the things that you liked about him as a prospect coming out of the draft could still be there. So I think A, it was a great pickup for the Raptors to go out and make that move, and B, I think that there is a world where he thrives in this situation and the Raptors actually get a pretty decent player out of this. At 2, this one seems like a bit of a gimme, but it's Grady Dick. He is coming off of a rookie campaign that was inconsistent, but showed a lot of flashes. And if you guys listened to Dynamite, you know that he was a player who I kind of gushed about a little bit. I really enjoyed what he was able to do, not just as a three-point shooter. I was impressed with how little he was actually looking for that. He was one who was looking to create his own shot off of the dribble and really start to try to pressure teams a little bit more. So I think that there is actually a lot to work with when you're trying to mold that offensive game. And I think there is a relatively high ceiling. Like I don't envision Grady Dick ever getting all-star votes or anything like that, but I do think that there is a pretty high ceiling for this kid to be more than just a complimentary bench offensive piece. And at number 1, it is Quickly. I have him as a potential breakout player in the entire NBA this year, but for the Raptors, I think that he has a chance to really thrive in an offensive system that I like, that Darko is running, and with Scotty Barnes, who he does seem like he would fit really well with. That was the big draw when they made that move in the regular season, trading OG Anunoby off to the New York Knicks, bringing in Quickly instead of getting picks or whatever. It's that Quickly is young. he got expensive very quickly. Pardon the pun. But he is someone who is supposed to fit really, really well with Scotty Barnes. And I think having a full training camp and giving Darko a full offseason to try to mastermind how that's going to work, I think that there's going to be some really, really fun nights offensively for Quickley this year. So those are the guys who I think are going to break out for the Toronto Raptors. We will continue team-specific previews and move on to the Calgary Flames. The last portion of the Calgary Flames preview, looking at a couple, like, you guys know we like doing the win totals around here, but what about some player props? We got a couple on the Calgary Flames that I like going into the regular season, so let's look at it. Dramatic as shit. So we always like to do, like I said, the look at team totals during the year, or during the preseason and the previews leading up to the year. But don't always click with the player props. But there are a couple, when we're looking at it from a Calgary Flames standpoint, that I actually kind of think are a little bit interesting to look at. And so the first one now, with the Flames this year, there aren't many. Like, if we were doing a Toronto Maple Leafs podcast, we have a lot to pick from. But for the Flames, there isn't actually a ton. But there are still a couple that I have my eye on. And the first is Dustin Wolf. You guys know I have been doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on my Dustin Wolf content this year. And so I do think that there is going to be a real resurgence for this guy. And his total for the year is at 21.5 wins. I have concerns about picking an over on anything that goes with Calgary Flames wins this year. But I do think he is going to be the main goalie for this hockey club. And I mean, 21 wins is 42 points. They're probably going to get 42 points at different points this year. So I think that he is still going to be good enough that he is going to steal a couple of games. I think even without Sharon Govich, there's going to be enough offense to kind of steal a couple of games. Have concerns about the goal or about the defense. 100% I do. But I think that I still think there are going to be enough wins in there that Dustin Wolf gets over this 21.5 mark. So that is the first one that I'm looking at. The second is Nazem Kadri over 30 goals, or just to reach 30 goals. That is at plus 200 right now. So that is one that I like. Again, for those on the regulatory side who may be watching, this is not gambling advice. This is just things that I like. Let's make that abundantly clear. I'm not saying do this. I'm just saying that, something I'm thinking about. For the Flames last year, Nazem Kadri had 29 goals with this Flames team. Now, at least in the early part of the season, he is going to be starting with Andrei Kuzmenko on his side. That is a really good playmaker that Nazem Kadri has at his disposal. Also, the Flames power play was dog shit in the early part of last year. Kuzmenko comes in, fixed. So I think there's going to be more power play goal opportunities for Kadri this year. I think there are going to be more regular, even strength opportunities for Kadri. And so both of these are assuming health. But I do think that Nazem Kadri to get to 30 goals at plus 200 is something that I do like and I do have my eye on. Not telling you to do it, just, something I have my eye on. So that is the last little bit of the Flames preview. For, if you haven't noticed, or if you're new here, I do the kind of mega previews for some of the things that I've done. And so every Flames preview bit that we've done on Couch Potatoes so far is going to be compiled, and we're going to play that. And I think I'm going to try to stream that before the show tomorrow. That is going to be kind of the plan there. So get ready for that. Now let's shift to the world of professional wrestling, as it was Monday Night Raw last night. 2 hours! So let's do a quick breakdown of what we saw from Monday Night Raw last night. Monday Night Raw, the 2-hour variety, went down in St. Louis, Missouri. The show starts with CM Punk, and immediately I was like, man, okay, because you guys know, if you were listening, I was saying yesterday, I don't want CM Punk coming out and being fine, and I don't want Drew McIntyre, these guys need to sell the damages from this. And now, to that degree, CM Punk did a great job. He looked genuinely hurt and looked very uncomfortable. I thought it was a good promo to just like, okay, this is putting a real bow on this, and we're moving on now, and it's off. It's in the past, and I'm moving forward, looking for a championship and looking for a couple other things as well. So that I thought it did a good job of selling the injuries. It did a good job of just like, let's get this guy on TV, really show how much damage has been done, and now get him moving forward. And then you plant the seeds when Seth Rollins come out. So that is, I think, I thought it was a good use of time. And this was something they did throughout the show. And I think it was a way to kind of still get some of the storytelling done that you wanted to in 3 hours and do it in 2, where you had a crossover of Punk leaving and in comes Seth Rollins, and then they did it again with Jey Uso, and like you just had a lot of crossover with those guys at different times, and that helped to kind of string together a few different things, and also kind of visually pair up, all right, that guy with this guy with that guy over here, this and that. Like you did a good job of, I think, kind of mixing and matching all of those things together. So I thought that was a part of this show that they did really well. Seth Rollins comes out, he cuts a promo. It's a Seth Rollins promo. It's better than most promos you will see, but it doesn't get to the upper echelons of the epic promo doers of this generation. Like it was a Seth Rollins promo, and he challenged Bronson Reed to a match, and thusly they will have a match at some point soon, I am sure. The Intercontinental title match was good. It wasn't a blowaway match, but I don't think it should have been. When you have Jay, who is still like solidifying himself as the Intercontinental Champion and as an upper mid-card type of a performer, you don't need to have super competitive matches every night. And with the story that they are telling with Xavier Woods right now, I don't think this needed to be a 5-star drag him out classic. You give Xavier Woods a little bit of shine, and then Jay gets the win. And then after, Braun comes out, turns back into a monster. I thought that was really well done. And so there, again, in something that probably would have been 2 separate segments on a 3-hour show, they got over the Kofi and Xavier feud still in this match. They got Braun back to being a monster with this match. You got Jay a win. So you did a whole lot in just one segment. So I thought they did a really good job. We covered like 4 different things in the first like 30 minutes of the show. So I thought they did a good job with that. One of the things I didn't love was R-Truth coming in and saying, Miz, like, look, you forgot, I'm not in the Judgment Day anymore, and making it a bit of a jokey thing out of that. And I get we're hopefully fucking building to this thing of this being serious, but I thought it kind of took away from the turn last week that everyone saw coming, and was what it was. But I thought it took away from it a little bit. That Truth is like, oh man, you thought I was with the Judgment Day. And then Miz kind of gets it back on track, and that was fine. And now they're setting up a match, and the like our kids play together line I thought was an interesting one. And so I do wonder if we're going to start to see a little bit more seriousness out of this potentially, but it doesn't really have me. I thought we had a good pre-match promo with Sheamus and Pete Dunne setting up their match. I thought they did a really, really cool job. This one was a little old school in a lame way, like not old school in a, oh wow, this is Terry Funk and it's bleeding and it's all these different things. This was old school in a, remember that time there was like dog food and pumpkins and this guy wore a jack-o'-lantern, and it was that sort of like a SmackDown 2015 on a pre-taped Thanksgiving episode or something like that. They did end up having a good match out of it. It was a bit more serious than what they used to do with those sorts of things. Like the finish would have been like Pete Dunne drowning in booze or something like that. So this one, that they at least treated it with a little bit more seriousness. This was one of the ones where Joe Tessitore, I thought, went a little bit over the top on it. And I think his energy for big moments is really good. And I like him in boxing a lot. And maybe he was a little bit too 100% all the time for Monday Night Football. But I do think for the wild world of college football, he's pretty good at it as well. And for WWE, I think the emotion and the energy that he brings to big moments is actually really, really good. But when it's not actually a big moment and he's still going at it, it's a little, like he called Sheamus's win over Pete Dunne in the Donnybrook Brawl a historic win for Sheamus. It's like, yeah, he got his hands zip tied, but this is a guy who's won multiple championships and was pursuing the Intercontinental title because he would have been a Grand Slam champion. So in terms of the historic nature of Sheamus's career, winning the Donnybrook Brawl on a Monday in October against Pete Dunne, it's probably not going to crack the top 50. So I thought that was where Joe Tessitore was maybe being just a little bit over the top. We had and what is probably going to be a more constant thing, get everybody on TV match, a 10-woman tag. It didn't advance anything. And this is, I think, going to be, honestly, that like these were the performers that I was wondering about when Raw got cut from 2 hours to 3. All 10 women in this match, you just worry about where are they going to fit. And we have seen just throwing different iterations of them out in matches every single week isn't going to build the storyline enough to get people to give a shit about any of this. So there needs to be a little bit more character development or any type of investment that is something other than, oh, they had a 6-minute match, check. There needs to be a little bit something built into that, I believe. And then we get to the main event. It's Gunther taking on Sami Zayn. I thought this was a really, really good match. They are hindered by the fact that no one was taking it seriously, that Sami Zayn was going to beat Gunther. They're already promoting Gunther against Cody Rhodes for Crown Jewel as the Crown Jewel tournament to win the £8 billion belt. And so you couldn't take it seriously. Both put on a really, really good show. And obviously, like you get past this hurdle for Gunther now. You give Zayn a bit of plausible deniability that he never gave up. He just got choked out. And so maybe we get another Rocky montage or something with him. I do hope that there is... I hope that Sami doesn't just fall down the card now. We have done the booking to WrestleMania a couple of times on this show, and each time I have put Sami Zayn in the main event against Gunther again. I think that, like, obviously not the main event, they're Rock and Roman Reigns and Cody and Punk and all them, but in terms of being in the World Heavyweight Championship match, I think Sami Zayn has the claim to that right now, and I think you can build him kind of back up in kind of the way I wanted them to build up here, where he's actually winning matches and doing those things. I think you can build him back up into that challenger, so I'm very fascinated to see what they do next with him. But overall, like, Raw being 2 hours, flew by, man. You can zoom right through that thing. I thought it was a good show. I still think they hit a lot of the main beats, but the concerns about the kind of secondary and tertiary storylines, I think are warranted. And I think definitely there could be an improvement on that going forward. That is going to do it for the show today. Thank you all so much for stopping by. Shout out to Toxic in the chat as always. Coming out tomorrow, it is another live stream for Couch Potato Diary. That is going to be starting at 10 a.m. And then we will be doing a video game stream later on in the day. I think I'm going to work with something later, Toxic. And so I think I'm doing those at 2 lately. I do think I am going to push that now to starting at 3 o'clock. So 3 o'clock is going to be the video game stream. 10 a.m. is going to be the actual podcast stream tomorrow. So thank you all so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to all of you later.